Marcus had always believed he was irreplaceable. As the head of marketing at Sterling Tech, he strutted through the office like he owned the place, barking orders and taking credit for everyone else's ideas. His assistant Sarah watched it all unfold from her desk just outside his corner office, taking notes, scheduling his meetings, and quietly fixing his mistakes when no one was looking. "Sarah, get me coffee. The good stuff from that place downtown, not the swill from the break room," Marcus would demand without even looking up from his phone. "And cancel my 3 o'clock. I'm playing golf with Henderson from the Morrison account." Sarah would nod politely, add it to her endless list of tasks, and wonder how someone so incompetent had climbed so high up the corporate ladder. She had an MBA from Northwestern, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had been instrumental in landing their biggest clients. But Marcus made sure she stayed invisible during presentations and client meetings. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday morning. Sarah had spent weeks developing a revolutionary social media strategy that could potentially double their client engagement rates. She'd researched market trends, analyzed competitor strategies, and created detailed projections showing a 30% increase in revenue. When she presented the preliminary findings to Marcus, his eyes lit up with greed rather than appreciation. "This is exactly what I've been working on," he announced at the next board meeting, presenting Sarah's work as his own breakthrough innovation. "I've identified key market inefficiencies that we can exploit using targeted demographic analysis and cross-platform integration." Sarah sat in the back of the conference room, watching her months of hard work being credited to the man who couldn't even spell analytics correctly in his emails. The board members nodded approvingly, praising Marcus for his visionary thinking and innovative approach. Mr. Sterling himself stood up to shake Marcus's hand, promising him a promotion and a substantial bonus. That afternoon, Marcus called Sarah into his office with a smug grin plastered across his face. "Pack up your things," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I'm promoting Jennifer from accounting to be my new assistant. Someone with your limited skill set isn't really necessary anymore. Security will escort you out." Sarah felt her heart race, but not from fear or sadness. It was excitement. She'd been planning her exit strategy for months, quietly documenting every stolen idea, every client relationship she'd built while Marcus took credit, every innovative solution she'd developed that had saved the company thousands of dollars. She had copies of emails, recorded conversations, and detailed records of her contributions to major projects. "That's perfectly fine, Marcus," she replied calmly, gathering her personal items from her desk. "I'm sure you'll do just fine without me." As security walked her to the parking garage, Sarah pulled out her phone and made a call. "Hello, Mr. Chen. This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm ready to discuss that business partnership we talked about." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of her own digital marketing firm, Mitchell Dynamics, watching her team of 12 employees bustling around the open concept office space. She'd secured startup funding from 3 different investors, poached the best talent from various agencies around the city, and already signed contracts with 5 major clients who were eager to work with someone who actually understood their needs. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Sarah reviewed the quarterly projections on her tablet. Revenue was exceeding expectations by 40%, and they'd just landed the Morrison account that Marcus had spent years trying to secure. Apparently, Henderson had been impressed by the innovative proposals that Sarah's team had presented, proposals that were light years ahead of anything Sterling Tech had ever offered. Her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ms. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Marcus Thornfield from Sterling Tech." Sarah smiled and straightened her blazer. "Send him in." Marcus walked through the door looking nothing like the confident executive who had fired her 6 months earlier. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. He clutched a folder against his chest like a life preserver. "Sarah, wow, this place looks incredible," he said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I heard about your success through the industry grapevine. Really impressive stuff." "Thank you, Marcus. Please, have a seat." Sarah gestured to one of the comfortable chairs across from her desk, noting how he seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the circumstances that had brought him to her office. Marcus fidgeted with the folder, clearly struggling to find the right words. Look, I'll cut straight to the chase. Things haven't been going well at Sterling Tech since you left. The Morrison account dropped us, 3 other major clients followed suit, and the board is asking some tough questions about our marketing strategies. Sarah nodded sympathetically while internally celebrating each piece of bad news. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Without her behind-the-scenes work, Marcus had been exposed as the fraud he'd always been. That social media campaign I implemented after you left, Marcus continued, his voice growing smaller. It was a complete disaster. Engagement dropped by 60%, and we lost 2 clients because of poorly targeted ads. I tried to replicate the success of previous campaigns, but I couldn't figure out what made them work. Of course he couldn't, Sarah thought. He'd never understood the strategy behind any of the campaigns, because he'd never bothered to learn the actual work involved. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a resignation letter. I had to step down from my position last week. Mr. Sterling said I was no longer meeting the company's standards for innovation and results. He paused, swallowing his pride with visible difficulty. I was wondering if you might have any openings here. Any position would be fine. I just need to get back on my feet. Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering the man who had once held her career in his hands and had chosen to crush it out of spite and insecurity. She thought about the late nights she'd spent rebuilding her professional reputation, the fear she'd felt about starting over, and the satisfaction of proving that his assessment of her abilities had been completely wrong. As it happens, we do have an opening, she said finally. We need someone to handle administrative tasks, scheduling, and general office support. The position reports directly to me, and the salary is about 60% of what you were making at Sterling Tech. Marcus's face showed a mixture of relief and humiliation. I'll take it. The job requires attention to detail, the ability to follow instructions precisely, and absolute honesty about work contributions, Sarah continued, enjoying the irony of the situation more than she probably should have. You'll be supporting me and my team by handling the routine tasks that keep the office running smoothly. Think of it as being an executive assistant, but with more responsibility for accuracy and less room for creative interpretation of your duties. I understand, Marcus replied quietly. When can I start? Sarah stood up and extended her hand across the desk. Welcome to Mitchell Dynamics, Marcus. I think this is going to be a very educational experience for both of us. As they shook hands, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically their positions had reversed. The man who had once treated her like an expendable inconvenience was now desperate for her approval and dependent on her generosity for his livelihood. She'd built something remarkable from nothing, while he'd managed to destroy everything that had been handed to him. 6 months into his employment at Mitchell Dynamics, Marcus had transformed into a model employee. He arrived early, stayed late when necessary, and approached every task with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that Sarah had always demonstrated but he had never appreciated. He scheduled meetings efficiently, maintained detailed records, and never once tried to take credit for work that wasn't his own. Sarah watched him deliver coffee to the conference room where she was meeting with a potential new client, noting how he moved with quiet professionalism rather than the arrogant swagger she remembered. He'd learned to listen more than he spoke, to ask questions when he didn't understand something, and to respect the expertise of his colleagues. Your assistant seems very capable, commented Mrs. Rodriguez, the CEO of a major retail chain they were hoping to sign. It's refreshing to work with a company where even the support staff understands the importance of detail and follow-through. Marcus has been invaluable to our team, Sarah replied, meaning every word. He brings a unique perspective to our operations, and his experience in corporate environments has helped us streamline our processes significantly. It was true. Marcus's years of observing successful marketing strategies, even if he hadn't understood them at the time, had given him insights that proved useful in his support role. He could anticipate client needs, identify potential problems before they developed, and contribute meaningfully to brainstorming sessions when his input was requested. After the meeting concluded successfully with Mrs. Rodriguez signing a 6-figure contract, Sarah found Marcus organizing files in the supply room. Excellent work on the Rodriguez preparation materials, she said. Your timeline suggestions helped us structure the presentation perfectly. Marcus looked up from the filing cabinet a genuine smile replacing the fake corporate grin she remembered from their Sterling Tech days. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to something meaningful. This company, what you've built here, it's impressive in ways I never understood before." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Marcus set down the stack of folders and leaned against the desk, his posture relaxed rather than defensive. "At Sterling Tech, I thought success meant taking credit, climbing ladders, and making sure everyone knew who was in charge. I never realized that real leadership means making everyone around you better at their jobs. You've created an environment where people want to excel because they feel valued and supported." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "I used to think you were just good at following instructions and handling details. I never saw that you were actually the one generating the ideas, solving the problems, and building the relationships that made everything work. I was so focused on maintaining my position that I never learned how to actually do the job." Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty, while remembering the years of frustration she'd endured under his management. "Everyone has to start somewhere, Marcus. The important thing is being willing to learn and grow." "I have learned," he said earnestly. "Working for you has taught me more about business, leadership, and personal integrity than my entire previous career. I understand now that competence isn't about authority, it's about results. And respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you have to earn through consistent actions." As Sarah walked back to her office, she reflected on the unexpected turn their professional relationship had taken. The man who had once dismissed her potential had become one of her most reliable team members, and the revenge she'd initially sought had evolved into something more meaningful. The satisfaction of building something excellent and the knowledge that she'd given someone else the chance to become better than they'd been before. The irony wasn't lost on her that Marcus had been right about one thing. She had been powerless in their old dynamic. But he'd been completely wrong about what that meant. Her temporary powerlessness hadn't been a permanent limitation, it had been a catalyst that drove her to create her own source of power. Now, instead of being dependent on someone else's recognition or approval, she controlled her own destiny and had the authority to lift others up along the way. Mitchell Dynamics continued to grow, eventually becoming one of the most respected marketing firms in the city. Sarah's leadership style, based on recognizing and developing talent rather than hoarding credit, created a culture where innovation flourished and employees stayed loyal for years. Marcus remained with the company, eventually earning promotions based on merit and contributing to strategies that helped their clients achieve remarkable success. Sometimes Sarah would catch him looking around the office with an expression of amazement, as if he still couldn't quite believe how different things had turned out. She'd learned that true victory wasn't about revenge or humiliation, it was about proving that excellence could triumph over mediocrity, and that treating people with respect and recognizing their contributions created better outcomes for everyone involved. The boy who had once thought she'd be powerless without him had discovered that she was actually powerful because of who she chose to become, with or without his approval. The success of Mitchell Dynamics caught the attention of industry publications, and Sarah found herself being interviewed for marketing magazines and invited to speak at conferences. During one particularly memorable panel discussion about innovative leadership strategies, a journalist asked her about the secret to building such a loyal and productive team. "I think the key is recognizing that every person brings unique value to an organization," Sarah explained to the audience of marketing executives. "When you create an environment where people feel heard and appreciated, they'll surprise you with their capabilities. Sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected sources." Marcus was in the audience that day, having accompanied Sarah to take notes and coordinate her schedule for the conference. He watched her field questions with the kind of expertise and confidence that he'd once possessed himself, but with a genuineness that his own leadership had always lacked. When someone asked about overcoming setbacks and professional challenges, Marcus saw Sarah's eyes briefly find his in the crowd before she answered. "Everyone faces moments when their career doesn't go according to plan," she said thoughtfully. "The choice you have to make is whether you'll let those setbacks define your limitations or motivate you to exceed your own expectations. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you professionally is being forced to prove your worth independently." After the conference, as they waited for their flight back home, Marcus brought Sarah her coffee exactly the way she liked it, something he'd learned through careful observation rather than barked instructions. "That was an excellent presentation," he said, settling into the airport lounge chair beside her. The question about team dynamics really seemed to resonate with the audience. "Thank you," Sarah replied, reviewing her notes from the other presentations they'd attended. "I've been thinking about expanding our consulting services to include organizational restructuring. There are a lot of companies out there struggling with the same issues we've learned to address." Marcus nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from her tablet, curious about the serious tone in his voice. "Of course. Do you ever regret not confronting me more directly back at Sterling Tech? I mean, you had evidence of everything I was doing wrong, all the credit I was stealing. You could have gone to the board or filed complaints with HR." Sarah considered the question carefully. She'd been asked variations of it before, usually by other women who'd faced similar situations in their careers. Honestly, no. Going that route would have meant staying in a system that was already broken, trying to prove my worth to people who had already demonstrated they weren't interested in recognizing it. Building something new allowed me to define success on my own terms. But wasn't it risky? Starting over with no guaranteed income, having to prove yourself all over again? "Everything worthwhile involves risk," she replied. "But I realized that staying in a situation where I was undervalued was actually the bigger risk. I was risking my potential, my creativity, and my professional growth by remaining in an environment that stifled all of those things." Marcus absorbed this, understanding for the first time the courage it had taken for her to walk away from the security of a steady paycheck and venture into entrepreneurship. "I never appreciated how much you were contributing back then. I was so focused on protecting my own position that I couldn't see the bigger picture. That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you," Sarah said, closing her tablet and giving him her full attention. "I've been impressed with your growth over the past year, and I think you're ready for more responsibility." Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, remembering how promotions and increased responsibility had once meant more opportunities to fail publicly. But working at Mitchell Dynamics had taught him that advancement here was based on demonstrated competence rather than political maneuvering. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "I want to create a new position, Director of Client Relations. It would involve managing our existing accounts, identifying expansion opportunities, and serving as the primary liaison for our biggest clients. You've been observing our processes for over a year now, and you understand both the client perspective and the internal operations better than anyone else on the team." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "You'd trust me with that level of responsibility?" "Marcus, you've earned it. You know our clients' needs. You've proven you can manage complex schedules and competing priorities, and most importantly, you've learned to put the company's success ahead of your own ego. Those are exactly the qualities we need in that role." The promotion announcement at the Monday morning team meeting was met with genuine applause from the Mitchell Dynamics staff. Marcus had spent months building relationships with his colleagues based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, and everyone had witnessed his transformation from a desperate job seeker to a valuable team member. Jennifer Walsh, the senior graphic designer who had joined the company shortly after Marcus, approached him after the meeting. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "I remember when you first started here, you seemed so different from the other executives I'd worked with. You actually listened to what people had to say." "Thank you, Jennifer." "I had to learn how to listen," Marcus replied honestly. "It took me longer than it should have to realize that everyone on a team has something valuable to contribute." As Director of Client Relations, Marcus discovered talents he'd never known he possessed. His years of watching Sarah build relationships had taught him the importance of genuine communication and follow-through. He began implementing systematic check-ins with clients, not just to update them on project progress, but to understand their evolving business needs and identify new ways Mitchell Dynamics could support their goals. His first major success came with the Morrison account, the same client he'd lost at Sterling Tech. Henderson, the Morrison marketing director, had been initially skeptical about working with Marcus again, but was quickly impressed by his transformed approach to client service. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we needed," Henderson told Sarah during a quarterly review meeting. "Marcus identified 3 opportunities for campaign optimization that we hadn't even considered. His insights into consumer behavior patterns have already improved our conversion rates by 20%. Sarah smiled. remembering the days when Marcus couldn't have explained conversion rates if his career had depended on it. He's become quite skilled at translating complex marketing concepts into actionable business strategies. After Henderson left, Marcus remained in the conference room, organizing his presentation materials with the same meticulous attention to detail that Sarah had always demanded of herself. "I can't believe how much I didn't understand before," he said, shaking his head. "I spent years thinking that marketing was just about clever slogans and flashy graphics." "Understanding comes from experience and willingness to learn," Sarah replied. "You've put in the work to develop real expertise instead of just trying to fake your way through presentations." "Can I tell you something?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that the old Marcus would never have allowed himself to show. "Working here has made me realize how unhappy I was at Sterling Tech, even when I thought I was successful. I was constantly worried about being exposed as incompetent, always looking over my shoulder for threats to my position. I never actually enjoyed the work because I was too busy trying to appear important." Sarah nodded, understanding the exhaustion that came from maintaining a professional facade rather than developing genuine competence. Imposter syndrome is surprisingly common, especially in competitive environments. The difference is whether you respond by learning the skills you need or by preventing others from demonstrating theirs. "I definitely chose the wrong response," Marcus admitted. "I was so insecure about my own abilities that I couldn't stand seeing others succeed. It never occurred to me that supporting talented people would actually make me more successful too." This conversation marked a turning point in their professional relationship. Marcus began proposing innovative solutions to client challenges, drawing on his unique perspective as someone who understood both the executive mindset and the operational realities of marketing implementation. His proposals were thoughtful, well-researched, and demonstrated a deep understanding of both client needs and industry trends. One particularly successful initiative involved developing a comprehensive onboarding process for new clients that addressed common communication gaps and set clear expectations for project timelines and deliverables. The process reduced client complaints by 70% and increased renewal rates significantly. "This is brilliant," Sarah told him as she reviewed his detailed implementation plan. "You've identified pain points that we've been dealing with for years and created systematic solutions. This could become a model for other agencies." Marcus beamed with the kind of pride that came from genuine accomplishment rather than stolen credit. "I kept thinking about what would have made my experience as a client better when I was at Sterling Tech. Most of our frustrations came from unclear communication and unmet expectations." The success of the onboarding process led to Marcus being invited to present at the same industry conference where Sarah had spoken the previous year. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of marketing professionals, he felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that was entirely different from the anxiety he'd experienced during his Sterling Tech presentations. "Effective client relations isn't about managing people," he began, his voice growing stronger as he warmed to his topic. "It's about understanding their goals, anticipating their needs, and delivering results that exceed their expectations. This requires genuine expertise, not just impressive presentations." In the audience, Sarah watched with satisfaction as Marcus fielded questions with confidence and authority. He'd developed into the kind of executive she'd always hoped he could become: knowledgeable, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to excellence rather than just personal advancement. After his presentation, several audience members approached Marcus with business cards and collaboration proposals. One woman, the marketing director for a major technology company, was particularly interested in Mitchell Dynamics' approach to client onboarding. "Your presentation really resonated with our current challenges," she told Marcus. "We've been struggling with client retention, and I think your systematic approach could be exactly what we need. Would Mitchell Dynamics be interested in consulting on organizational restructuring?" Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Absolutely," he replied. "Let me put you in touch with our founder, Sarah Mitchell. She's the visionary behind our client-centered approach, and she'd be the right person to discuss a consulting engagement of that scope." Later, as they celebrated the successful conference over dinner, Sarah raised her glass in a toast. "To exceeding expectations," she said. To second chances, Marcus replied, clinking his glass against hers. The consulting contract that emerged from Marcus's conference presentation became Mitchell Dynamics' entry into a lucrative new market. Sarah developed a comprehensive methodology for helping companies improve their client relationships and internal communication processes, drawing on everything they'd learned about building effective teams and maintaining long-term business partnerships. Marcus played a crucial role in these consulting engagements, sharing his unique perspective as someone who had experienced both toxic and healthy workplace cultures. His ability to identify and address the kind of defensive behaviors that undermine team effectiveness made him invaluable in helping other organizations transform their operations. During one particularly challenging consulting project with a struggling advertising firm, Marcus found himself working with an executive who reminded him strongly of his former self: arrogant, defensive, and unwilling to acknowledge the contributions of his subordinates. "I don't understand why we need to change our proven processes," the executive, David Chen, complained during a strategy session. "We've been successful for 15 years doing things our way." Marcus recognized the fear and insecurity behind the bluster, having once used identical language to resist changes that threatened his perceived authority. "Success in the past doesn't guarantee future results," he replied patiently. "The market has evolved, client expectations have changed, and your team members have insights that could help you adapt to new challenges." "My team members are there to execute my vision, not to question my strategies," David shot back. "That's exactly the mindset that's limiting your growth," Marcus explained, drawing on lessons he'd learned through painful experience. "When you shut down input from talented people, you're essentially operating with only a fraction of your organization's intellectual capital. The companies that thrive are the ones that harness everyone's capabilities." The transformation of David's company took 6 months and required Marcus to draw on every lesson he'd learned about leadership, communication, and professional growth. Watching David gradually evolve from a defensive autocrat into a collaborative leader reminded Marcus of his own journey and reinforced his appreciation for the opportunity Sarah had given him. By the 3rd anniversary of Mitchell Dynamics, the company had grown to 45 employees and had been recognized as one of the fastest-growing marketing firms in the region. Sarah stood before the assembled staff at their annual celebration, looking out at faces that represented not just professional success, but a culture built on mutual respect and shared excellence. 3 years ago, this company was just an idea born from the belief that everyone deserves to work in an environment where their contributions are valued and their potential is recognized, she began. "Today, we're not just a successful business, we're proof that treating people well and expecting excellence creates extraordinary results." The applause was warm and genuine, reflecting the authentic pride that everyone in the room felt about their collective achievements. Marcus, now wearing the title of Vice President of Client Strategy, felt a deep satisfaction that was entirely different from the hollow validation he'd once sought through titles and corner offices. After the celebration, as the staff gradually departed for home, Marcus lingered to help Sarah clean up the conference room. "Thank you," he said simply, stacking chairs with the same attention to detail he brought to every task. "For what?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew. "For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For giving me the chance to become better than I was. For teaching me what real leadership looks like." Sarah paused in her own cleanup efforts, considering the journey they'd both taken from that difficult period at Sterling Tech to this moment of shared success. "You did the hard work of changing, Marcus. I just provided the opportunity. But you could have let me fail. After everything I put you through, you had every right to enjoy watching me struggle. Instead, you helped me succeed. Helping you succeed was helping everyone succeed," Sarah replied. "That's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about making someone pay for past mistakes. Justice is about creating a future where those mistakes don't get repeated." As they turned off the lights and locked up the office, both of them reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. Sarah had built the kind of company she'd always dreamed of working for, one where talent was recognized regardless of hierarchy, and where innovation flourished, because people felt safe to take creative risks. Marcus had discovered that genuine competence was far more satisfying than stolen credit, and that earning respect was infinitely more fulfilling than demanding deference. The story of their transformed relationship became something of a legend within their industry, cited in business schools and leadership seminars as an example of how toxic workplace dynamics could be overcome through principled leadership and genuine personal growth. Neither of them had set out to become a case study, but their experience demonstrated that it was possible for both individuals and organizations to evolve beyond their worst behaviors. Marcus never forgot the lessons he'd learned from his fall from grace and subsequent redemption. Years later, when he was offered a position as CEO of a struggling marketing firm, his first act was to implement the kind of transparent, merit-based culture that Sarah had created at Mitchell Dynamics. He made sure that every employee, regardless of their position in the hierarchy, had opportunities to contribute ideas and receive recognition for their work. The firm he led became known for its innovative approaches and employee satisfaction, attracting top talent who were drawn to an environment where excellence was rewarded and potential was nurtured. Marcus often told the story of his own transformation to new hires, emphasizing that everyone deserved the chance to grow beyond their past mistakes if they were willing to put in the work required for genuine change. Sarah, meanwhile, expanded Mitchell Dynamics into multiple markets and eventually wrote a book about building inclusive, high-performance organizations. Her approach to leadership, based on recognizing and developing talent rather than hoarding authority, influenced a generation of executives who went on to create their own cultures of excellence and mutual respect. The man who had once thought she'd be powerless without him had learned that true power came not from controlling others but from empowering them to achieve their best. And the woman who had once been dismissed as merely a competent assistant had proven that competence, when combined with vision and integrity, could create opportunities that transformed not just individual careers, but entire organizational cultures. Their story became a testament to the possibility of redemption, the power of second chances, and the profound impact that principled leadership could have on everyone it touched. In the end, both of them had won, but more importantly, everyone who worked with them had won as well. 5 years after founding Mitchell Dynamics, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would test everything she'd built and believed about second chances. The caller was Margaret Sterling, the widow of the late founder of Sterling Tech, and her voice carried the weight of desperation that Sarah recognized from her own darkest professional moments. "Ms. Mitchell, I know this is highly unusual, but I need your help," Margaret began, her normally composed demeanor cracking slightly. "Sterling Tech is facing bankruptcy. After my husband passed last year, the board brought in new leadership, but they've made decisions that have destroyed everything Harold spent 40 years building." Sarah listened carefully, remembering the company where her career had nearly ended before it truly began. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Sterling. Your husband built an impressive organization." "Thank you. The reason I'm calling is that I've been following your company's success, and I know about your history with Sterling Tech. I also know that Marcus Thornfield now works for you as a vice president." Margaret paused, gathering her composure. "I'd like to hire Mitchell Dynamics to consult on a complete organizational restructuring. We need someone who understands both our culture and what it takes to build a truly successful marketing firm." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The company that had dismissed her was now seeking her expertise to survive. "That's certainly an interesting proposition, Mrs. Sterling. What makes you think we'd be the right fit for such a complex undertaking?" "Because you've proven that it's possible to create something better. Sterling Tech used to be innovative and dynamic, but somewhere along the way, we became rigid and political. People stopped taking risks, stopped sharing ideas, stopped caring about excellence. From what I've observed, Mitchell Dynamics embodies everything we used to be and everything we need to become again." Sarah found herself genuinely intrigued by the challenge. Sterling Tech had been a respected name in the industry for decades, and its client roster included some of the most prestigious companies in the region. If it could be transformed rather than allowed to fail, the impact would extend far beyond saving jobs. It would demonstrate that even deeply entrenched corporate cultures could evolve. "I'll need to discuss this with my team," Sarah replied. "This would be our largest consulting engagement by far, and it would require a significant commitment of time and resources." "I understand completely. Take all the time you need, I just hope you'll consider it." Sterling Tech employed over 300 people at its peak, and many of them are talented individuals who deserve better leadership than they've been getting. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her office contemplating the magnitude of what Margaret Sterling was proposing. Restructuring a failing company was exponentially more complex than building a new one from scratch. It would require dismantling decades of accumulated dysfunction, while preserving the institutional knowledge and client relationships that still had value. She called Marcus into her office to discuss the opportunity. When she explained the situation, his expression cycled through surprise, concern, and finally, thoughtful consideration. "That's incredibly ambitious," he said finally. Sterling Tech's problems run deep. It's not just about changing policies or reorganizing departments. It's about transforming a fundamental mindset that's been entrenched for years. Exactly. Which is why I wanted your perspective. You understand that culture from the inside, and you've experienced the kind of transformation we'd be trying to facilitate on a much larger scale. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through the implications. The people who are still there, the ones who haven't been driven away or laid off, they're probably the most entrenched in the old ways of doing things. They've survived by learning to navigate the political landscape rather than by demonstrating competence. But some of them might be like you were, Sarah pointed out. Capable people who've been operating in a system that rewarded the wrong behaviors. If we could create an environment where excellence was valued over politics, it would be like performing surgery on a living patient, Marcus mused. Extremely difficult but potentially life-saving. They spent the next week researching Sterling Tech's current financial position, employee turnover rates, and client retention statistics. The picture that emerged was sobering. Revenue had declined by 40% over the past 2 years, employee satisfaction scores were at historic lows, and several major clients had terminated their contracts citing poor service and lack of innovation. Sarah assembled her senior team to discuss whether Mitchell Dynamics should take on such a challenging project. The conference room buzzed with animated discussion as her colleagues debated the risks and opportunities. It could establish us as the premier organizational restructuring consultancy in the region, argued Lisa Chen, their head of strategic planning. Successfully transforming a company of Sterling Tech's size and complexity would be an incredible case study. But it could also damage our reputation if we fail, cautioned David Rodriguez, their financial director. We'd be associating our brand with a struggling company, and if the transformation doesn't work, we could be seen as part of the problem. Jennifer Walsh, who had become Mitchell Dynamics' creative director, offered a different perspective. What about the ethical dimension? If we can save 300 jobs and transform a toxic workplace culture, isn't that worth the risk? Marcus listened to the debate before sharing his own thoughts. I keep thinking about what it was like to work in that environment. The constant anxiety, the political maneuvering, the way talented people either left or gave up trying to excel. If we can change that, we'd be doing more than saving a company. We'd be improving hundreds of people's professional lives. Sarah appreciated the passion and thoughtfulness her team brought to the discussion. This was exactly the kind of collaborative decision-making that had made Mitchell Dynamics successful. Let's approach this systematically, she said finally. Lisa, I want you to develop a preliminary assessment framework. David, can you analyze the financial risks and potential returns? Jennifer, I'd like your thoughts on how we could maintain our own company culture while taking on such an intensive project. What about me? Marcus asked. I want you to go back to Sterling Tech, Sarah replied. Not as a former employee, but as our advanced scout. Talk to people who are still there, understand the current dynamics, and identify who might be allies in a transformation effort. The following Monday, Marcus walked through the familiar corridors of Sterling Tech for the first time in over 2 years. The changes were immediately apparent. Empty cubicles where productive employees used to work, outdated equipment that hadn't been replaced, and an atmosphere of resignation that permeated every conversation. He met with several former colleagues, carefully gauging their perspectives on the company's current state and their openness to change. What he discovered was both discouraging and hopeful. Many of the most talented people had indeed left, but those who remained included individuals who genuinely cared about the company's mission and were frustrated by their inability to contribute meaningfully. Elena Vasquez, a senior account manager who had always impressed Marcus with her client relationship skills, was particularly candid about the situation. "It's heartbreaking," she told him over coffee in the nearly empty cafeteria. "We have clients who've been with us for 15 years, and we're losing them because we can't deliver the kind of innovative solutions they need. The current leadership seems more interested in cost-cutting than in figuring out how to grow revenue. What would need to change for you to feel optimistic about working here again?" Marcus asked. Elena considered the question carefully. "We'd need leadership that actually understands marketing, not just corporate politics. We'd need to invest in our people again, instead of treating them as expendable resources. And we'd need to remember that our job is to help clients succeed, not just to preserve our own positions." Similar conversations with other employees revealed a consistent pattern: deep frustration with the current management, genuine affection for the company's historical mission, and cautious hope that things could improve with the right leadership. Marcus also observed the current management team in action during a client presentation that Margaret Sterling had arranged for him to attend. The presentation was a disaster of corporate buzzwords, generic strategies, and obvious unfamiliarity with the client's actual business needs. The client representatives were polite but clearly unimpressed, and Marcus could see why Sterling Tech was losing accounts at an alarming rate. When he reported back to Sarah, his assessment was blunt but not hopeless. "The company is dying, but it's not dead yet. There are still good people there who remember what excellence looked like, and there are clients who would give Sterling Tech another chance if they saw genuine improvement." "What about the current management team?" Sarah asked. "They're the biggest obstacle to transformation. They've created a culture of fear and mediocrity, and they're not going to voluntarily give up the power they've accumulated. Any restructuring effort would need to address leadership changes as a fundamental requirement." Sarah nodded, having suspected as much. Mrs. Sterling mentioned that she still has significant influence with the board of directors. "If we recommend leadership changes, she might be able to implement them." Over the next month, Sarah and her team developed a comprehensive transformation proposal that addressed every aspect of Sterling Tech's operations. The plan was ambitious, requiring 18 months to fully implement, and involving everything from leadership restructuring to employee retraining to complete overhaul of client service processes. The financial projections showed that successful transformation could return Sterling Tech to profitability within 2 years and position it for sustainable growth thereafter. However, the proposal also made clear that half measures would likely result in continued decline and eventual bankruptcy. Margaret Sterling reviewed the proposal with her board of directors, and their response was swift and decisive. Within a week, the current CEO and senior management team had been terminated, and Mitchell Dynamics had been engaged as the primary consultancy for Sterling Tech's transformation. Sarah's first act was to address the entire Sterling Tech staff in the main conference room. Standing before 300 anxious employees, many of whom remembered her dismissal years earlier, she felt the weight of responsibility for their professional futures. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs and uncertain about what changes are coming," she began, her voice carrying the authority and compassion that had made her successful. "I want to be completely transparent about our goals and our process." She outlined the transformation plan, emphasizing that success would depend on everyone's willingness to embrace new ways of working and thinking about their roles. "We're not here to eliminate positions for the sake of cost-cutting. We're here to create an environment where talented people can do their best work and where clients receive exceptional service." The questions that followed revealed the depth of cynicism and fear that had developed over years of poor management. Employees wanted assurances about job security, clarity about performance expectations, and evidence that this transformation would be different from previous failed attempts at change. "I can't promise that everyone's job will remain exactly the same," Sarah replied honestly. "But I can promise that everyone who demonstrates competence and commitment to excellence will have opportunities to grow and contribute. Our success depends on your success." Marcus played a crucial role in the early stages of transformation, serving as a bridge between the Mitchell Dynamics consultants and the Sterling Tech employees. His credibility came from his unique position as someone who had worked in both cultures and could speak authentically about the benefits of the changes being implemented. He spent hours with individual employees, helping them understand how their roles might evolve and what new skills they might need to develop. Many of these conversations reminded him of his own early days at Mitchell Dynamics, when he'd struggled to adapt to a merit-based culture after years of political maneuvering. The hardest part for me was learning to trust that doing good work would actually be recognized and rewarded, he told a group of account managers during a training session. I'd spent so many years protecting myself from other people's success that I'd forgotten how to focus on my own excellence. The transformation process revealed both the worst and best aspects of Sterling Tech's culture. Some employees, particularly those who had risen through political manipulation rather than competence, resisted the changes and eventually left the company. Others, like Elena Vasquez, flourished in the new environment and quickly emerged as leaders in their departments. One of the most significant challenges was rebuilding client confidence. Many of Sterling Tech's former clients had been burned by poor service and broken promises, and convincing them to give the company another chance required demonstrating real changes rather than just promising them. Sarah personally led a client recovery initiative, reaching out to former clients and inviting them to see Sterling Tech's transformation firsthand. These meetings were often difficult, requiring Sarah to acknowledge past failures while presenting evidence of genuine improvement. "I understand your skepticism," she told the CEO of Morrison Industries during one such meeting. "Sterling Tech failed to meet your expectations, and words alone aren't going to rebuild that trust. What I'm asking for is the opportunity to demonstrate through actions that this is a fundamentally different organization." The breakthrough came when Morrison Industries agreed to a small pilot project that would allow Sterling Tech to prove its renewed capabilities. The project team, led by Elena Vasquez and supported by Marcus's strategic guidance, delivered results that exceeded Morrison's expectations and demonstrated the kind of innovation and attention to detail that had been missing for years. Word of Sterling Tech's successful client recoveries spread through the industry, and other former clients began expressing interest in working with the company again. Each successful project built momentum for the transformation and provided evidence that the changes were genuine and sustainable. 6 months into the restructuring process, Sarah received a visit from a familiar face. Tom Henderson from Morrison Industries, the same client that Marcus had lost years earlier, requested a meeting to discuss expanding their renewed partnership with Sterling Tech. "I have to admit, I was skeptical when Margaret Sterling told me about the transformation initiative," Henderson said as he toured the renovated Sterling Tech offices. "But the work your team has delivered over the past few months has been exceptional. It reminds me of why we originally chose Sterling Tech 15 years ago." Sarah smiled, remembering her own history with the Morrison account. "We're committed to delivering the kind of innovative, results-driven service that builds long-term partnerships. I'm particularly impressed with Marcus Thornfield's contributions," Henderson continued. "His strategic insights and client-focused approach have been invaluable. He's like a completely different person from the executive I worked with years ago." That afternoon, Sarah found Marcus in his temporary office at Sterling Tech, reviewing client feedback forms and project reports. The satisfaction on his face was evident as he compiled data showing consistent improvement in client satisfaction scores and project delivery metrics. "Henderson was very complimentary about your work on the Morrison account," Sarah told him. Marcus looked up from his reports, a genuine smile replacing the anxious expression he'd worn during his early days at Mitchell Dynamics. "It feels incredible to be contributing to solutions instead of creating problems. I keep thinking about how much time I wasted trying to appear competent instead of actually becoming competent. The important thing is that you learned the difference," Sarah replied, "and now you're helping other people make the same transition." The transformation of Sterling Tech took the full 18 months that Sarah had projected, but the results exceeded even her optimistic projections. Employee satisfaction scores improved dramatically, client retention rates returned to historical highs, and the company achieved profitability 6 months ahead of schedule. More importantly, Sterling Tech had developed a sustainable culture that could continue evolving and improving, even after Mitchell Dynamics concluded their formal consulting engagement. The employees who had survived the transformation had genuine expertise in their roles, and the leadership structure rewarded innovation and results rather than political maneuvering. At the conclusion of the project, Margaret Sterling hosted a celebration for everyone who had contributed to the company's renewal. Standing before an audience that included Sterling Tech employees, Mitchell Dynamics consultants, and representatives from client companies, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, I thought we might have to close Sterling Tech permanently, she said, her voice carrying both relief and pride. Today, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. We've rediscovered what made this company special in the first place: a commitment to excellence and a culture that brings out the best in talented people. Sarah was invited to speak about the transformation process, and she used the opportunity to highlight the contributions of everyone who had made the change possible. Organizational transformation isn't about implementing new policies or reorganizing departments, she explained. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to take risks, confident that their contributions will be recognized, and motivated to exceed their own expectations. Marcus was also asked to share his perspective on the transformation, both as a consultant and as someone who had experienced similar changes in his own career. The most important lesson I've learned is that it's never too late to become better than you were, he said. Whether you're talking about individuals or organizations, the capacity for positive change exists as long as you're willing to do the hard work required to achieve it. The success of the Sterling Tech transformation established Mitchell Dynamics as the premier organizational development consultancy in the region. Sarah found herself fielding inquiries from companies across multiple industries, all seeking to recreate the kind of culture change that had saved Sterling Tech from bankruptcy. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the impact on the individuals who had been part of the transformation. Elena Vasquez was promoted to Director of Client Services at Sterling Tech and went on to implement client relationship practices that became industry standards. Other employees used the skills and confidence they developed during the transformation to advance their own careers, either within Sterling Tech or at other organizations that valued their proven abilities. Marcus continued to split his time between Mitchell Dynamics and Sterling Tech, eventually taking on the role of Chief Operating Officer at Sterling Tech, while maintaining his consulting relationships with other organizations. His unique perspective as someone who had experienced both toxic and healthy workplace cultures made him invaluable in helping other companies navigate similar transformations. The relationship between Sarah and Marcus had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined during their difficult Sterling Tech days. They had become genuine colleagues and friends, bound together by shared experiences and mutual professional respect. Their story became a case study in business schools and leadership programs, demonstrating that even the most damaged professional relationships could be transformed through principled leadership and personal growth. Years later, when Sarah was asked to reflect on the most important lessons from her career, she would often return to the Sterling Tech transformation as an example of what was possible when people were given the opportunity to exceed their own limitations. Everyone deserves the chance to become better than they were, she would say. The question is whether we're willing to create environments that make that growth possible. The man who had once thought she'd be powerless without him had learned that true power came from empowering others to achieve their potential. And the woman who had refused to let someone else's limitations define her own possibilities had proven that with vision, persistence, and principled leadership, even the most entrenched problems could be solved, and the most damaged relationships could be healed. 7 years after the Sterling Tech transformation, Sarah received an invitation that would bring her story full circle in ways she never anticipated. The invitation came from Harvard Business School, requesting her to deliver the keynote address at their annual Leadership Excellence Conference. The theme was transformational leadership in the modern era, and Sarah's work had been selected as the primary case study for the entire 3-day event. Standing in her office at Mitchell Dynamics, now expanded to occupy 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, Sarah read through the detailed agenda with growing amazement. The conference would feature panel discussions analyzing her leadership philosophy, workshops based on the methodologies she'd developed, and breakout sessions led by executives who had implemented similar transformations in their own organizations. Marcus knocked on her door, carrying a stack of reports from their latest consulting engagement. "That looks like important correspondence," he observed, noting the Harvard letterhead. "They want me to keynote their leadership conference," Sarah said, still somewhat stunned by the magnitude of the recognition. Apparently, our Sterling Tech case study has become required reading in their organizational behavior curriculum. That's incredible, Sarah. You've influenced an entire generation of business leaders without even realizing it. She handed him the invitation to review. They're also asking if you'd be willing to participate in a panel discussion about personal transformation in leadership roles. Your story has become almost as well known as the Sterling Tech turnaround itself. Marcus read through the details, his expression mixing pride with the kind of nervousness he'd learned to channel into preparation and excellence. A Harvard Business School panel, he mused. 10 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be speaking at Harvard about leadership transformation, I'd have thought they were insane. 10 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be rebuilding the company that fired me, I'd have had the same reaction, Sarah replied with a smile. The months leading up to the Harvard conference became a period of reflection for both of them. Sarah found herself examining not just the tactical aspects of organizational transformation, but the deeper philosophical questions about human potential and the responsibility of leaders to create environments where that potential could flourish. She spent evenings reviewing the extensive documentation she'd compiled over the years: employee feedback surveys, client testimonials, financial performance data, and countless stories of individual transformation. The pattern that emerged was consistent across every successful engagement. When people felt valued, supported, and challenged to excel, they invariably exceeded expectations. Marcus, meanwhile, was preparing for his own presentation by revisiting his personal journey from toxic leadership to transformational leadership. He interviewed several of his former Sterling Tech colleagues, many of whom had gone on to leadership positions themselves and were implementing the principles they'd learned during the transformation. "The most important thing I learned," Elena Vasquez told him during one of these conversations, "was that leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute their best thinking." Elena had become CEO of a mid-sized marketing firm and was known for her innovative approach to employee development and client service. Her success was a direct result of the skills and confidence she'd developed during the Sterling Tech transformation, and her company had become a model for other organizations seeking to build inclusive, high-performance cultures. The Harvard conference drew over 2,000 attendees from around the world, including CEOs, academic researchers, and government officials interested in organizational development. Sarah's keynote address was scheduled for the opening morning, setting the tone for the entire event. Standing at the podium in Harvard's historic Sanders Theater, looking out at an audience that included some of the most influential business leaders in the world, Sarah felt a profound sense of responsibility. These people would take her ideas back to their organizations and implement them in ways that would affect thousands of employees and countless stakeholders. "Leadership transformation isn't about changing other people," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "It's about changing ourselves first, and then creating conditions where others can choose to change as well." She told the story of her own journey, from the dismissed assistant to the CEO of a thriving consultancy, emphasizing the lessons she'd learned about resilience, vision, and the power of principled action. But she also spoke candidly about the challenges and setbacks she'd faced, the moments of doubt, and the difficult decisions that had shaped her approach to leadership. "Every leader faces moments when their integrity is tested," she continued. "When you have the opportunity to take credit for someone else's work, to protect your own position at the expense of others, or to choose expedience over excellence. These moments don't define you by themselves, but the pattern of your choices in these moments absolutely does." The audience was completely engaged, taking notes and nodding in recognition of the challenges she described. Sarah could see in their faces the same mixture of aspiration and uncertainty that she'd felt throughout her own career development. She concluded her address with a challenge that would become one of the most quoted passages from the conference. "The question isn't whether you have the power to transform your organization. The question is whether you have the courage to transform yourself first. Because authentic transformation always begins with the person in the mirror." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. But what struck Sarah most was the quality of the applause. It wasn't just polite recognition. It was the kind of sustained, enthusiastic response that indicated her message had genuinely resonated with people who understood both the difficulty and the importance of the work she was describing. Marcus's panel discussion the following day drew an equally engaged audience. The panel included 3 other executives who had undergone significant personal transformations during their careers, and the conversation ranged from practical strategies for changing entrenched behaviors to the psychological challenges of admitting past mistakes and committing to different approaches. The hardest part of my transformation wasn't learning new skills, Marcus explained to the audience. It was unlearning the defensive behaviors that had helped me survive in toxic environments, but prevented me from thriving in healthy ones. A participant from the audience asked him about the role of accountability in personal transformation. How do you maintain new behaviors when you're surrounded by people who remember your old ones? Marcus considered the question carefully. That's where the importance of consistent action comes in. People will believe what they see over what they hear. Every time. You can't talk your way out of a reputation you acted your way into. You have to act your way into a new reputation. The panel discussion generated numerous follow-up questions and continued conversations throughout the remainder of the conference. Many attendees approached Marcus privately to share their own stories of transformation attempts, seeking advice on how to navigate similar challenges in their own careers. One conversation particularly stood out. A senior executive from a Fortune 500 company explained that he'd been struggling with defensive behaviors similar to those Marcus had described. I know I need to change, but I'm terrified of appearing weak or incompetent to my team, he admitted. The irony is that trying to appear strong when you're actually weak is exactly what makes you appear incompetent, Marcus replied. Real strength comes from acknowledging what you don't know, asking for help when you need it, and focusing on results rather than appearances. The conference generated significant media attention, with business publications featuring extensive coverage of Sarah's keynote and the broader discussions about transformational leadership. Several major corporations reached out to Mitchell Dynamics, requesting consultations on organizational development initiatives. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the network of relationships that developed among conference attendees. Sarah found herself at the center of an informal community of leaders who were committed to implementing the principles she'd described, and who supported each other through the challenges of organizational transformation. One such leader was Dr. Patricia Washington, the newly appointed CEO of a struggling healthcare system. During a private conversation following the conference, she explained her situation. We have brilliant medical professionals who are demoralized by bureaucratic inefficiencies and leadership that seems more interested in protecting territory than improving patient care. The parallels to your Sterling Tech story are striking. Sarah was intrigued by the application of her methodologies to healthcare, a sector where the stakes of transformation were literally life and death. Healthcare organizations face unique challenges because they're dealing with life and death decisions, while also managing complex regulatory requirements and financial pressures. Exactly, but the fundamental issues are the same. How do you create a culture where people feel safe to identify problems, propose solutions, and take ownership of outcomes? This conversation led to Mitchell Dynamics' most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive transformation of Metro General Hospital System, a network of 4 hospitals serving over 2 million patients annually. The engagement would require Sarah's team to work within the constraints of healthcare regulations, while fundamentally restructuring how the organization approached patient care, staff development, and operational efficiency. Marcus played a crucial role in the early assessment phase, conducting interviews with medical staff, administrators, and support personnel to understand the cultural dynamics that were impeding performance. What he discovered was a healthcare version of the same dysfunction he'd witnessed at Sterling Tech. Talented professionals who felt unheard, administrative systems that prioritized bureaucracy over patient outcomes, and leadership that had become isolated from the frontline realities of healthcare delivery. The nurses and doctors I spoke with are incredibly dedicated, he reported to Sarah after completing his initial assessment. But they're frustrated by systems that seem designed to prevent them from providing the best possible care. They have ideas for improvement, but no effective channels for implementing change. The hospital transformation required Sarah to adapt her methodologies to address the unique challenges of healthcare delivery. Unlike corporate environments where change could be implemented gradually, hospitals needed to maintain life-saving operations while simultaneously restructuring their approaches to patient care. Working closely with Dr. Washington and her leadership team, Sarah developed a phased transformation plan that prioritized patient safety while introducing new systems for communication, decision-making, and continuous improvement. The process required extensive training for medical staff, many of whom had never worked in environments where their input was actively sought and valued. The breakthrough came when Sarah implemented what she called frontline leadership councils, committees of nurses, doctors, and support staff who were given authority to identify problems and implement solutions within their areas of expertise. These councils became the engine of transformation, generating hundreds of improvements to patient care processes and operational efficiency. Dr. Maria Santos, a veteran emergency room physician, became one of the most effective leaders in the transformation. "For 20 years, I've been seeing the same problems over and over again," she told Sarah during a progress review meeting. "But no one ever asked me how to fix them. Now I'm chairing the Emergency Services Leadership Council, and we've reduced patient wait times by 40% while improving care quality." The hospital transformation took nearly 2 years to complete, but the results were remarkable. Patient satisfaction scores improved dramatically, medical errors decreased significantly, and staff turnover rates dropped to the lowest levels in the system's history. More importantly, the changes created a sustainable culture of continuous improvement that continued generating benefits long after the formal transformation was complete. The success of the Metro General project established Mitchell Dynamics as a leader in healthcare transformation, leading to engagements with hospital systems across the country. Sarah found herself testifying before congressional committees about healthcare reform, sharing insights about how organizational culture directly impacted patient outcomes. But the project also had personal significance for Sarah and Marcus. Working in healthcare settings reminded them daily of the ultimate purpose behind their work: creating environments where people could achieve their potential in service of something larger than themselves. "Every improvement we make in hospital operations potentially saves lives," Sarah reflected during one of their regular planning meetings. "It's a humbling reminder of why organizational transformation matters so much." Marcus nodded, thinking about the medical professionals he'd worked with, who had rediscovered their passion for healthcare through the transformation process. "I never thought my career would lead to work that was literally about life and death, but in many ways, that's what we've always been doing. We're helping people find meaning and purpose in their professional lives." The 10th anniversary of Mitchell Dynamics coincided with Sarah being named CEO of the Year by the National Association of Management Consultants. The award recognized not just her business success, but her contributions to advancing the field of organizational development and her commitment to creating positive change in workplaces across multiple industries. The anniversary celebration brought together employees from Mitchell Dynamics, clients from their various engagements, and colleagues from throughout the consulting industry. Standing before this diverse group of people whose lives had been touched by the work they'd done together, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. 10 years ago, Mitchell Dynamics was founded on a simple premise: that everyone deserves to work in an environment where their contributions are valued and their potential is recognized, she said to the assembled crowd. Today, we've proven that this isn't just an idealistic vision, it's a practical approach to building successful organizations that create value for everyone involved. Marcus, now serving as president of Mitchell Dynamics, reflected on his own transformation during the celebration. "I've learned that leadership isn't about having all the answers," he told the audience. "It's about creating an environment where the best answers can emerge from anyone, anywhere in the organization." The event concluded with the announcement of the Mitchell Dynamics Leadership Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing leadership development resources to emerging leaders who might not otherwise have access to such training. The institute would offer scholarships, mentorship programs, and educational resources focused on transformational leadership principles. "We've been fortunate to work with established organizations that had resources to invest in transformation," Sarah explained. "But we also want to support leaders who are just beginning their careers, helping them develop the skills and mindset that will allow them to create positive change wherever they go." The Leadership Institute attracted support from former clients, partner organizations, and individual donors who had been inspired by Sarah's work. Within its first year, the Institute had provided leadership development opportunities to over 500 emerging leaders from diverse backgrounds and industries. One of the Institute's most successful programs was the Second Chance Leadership Track, designed specifically for individuals who had made significant mistakes in their careers and were committed to transformation. The program was inspired by Marcus's own journey and provided structured support for people seeking to develop more effective leadership approaches. Everyone deserves the opportunity to become better than they were, Marcus explained to the first cohort of Second Chance participants. But transformation requires more than just good intentions. It requires honest self-assessment, commitment to continuous learning, and the courage to act differently, even when it's uncomfortable. The program's success stories became legendary within the consulting industry. Participants went on to lead successful transformations at their own organizations, and many stayed connected to the Institute as mentors and advisors for future cohorts. As Sarah approached her 15th year as CEO of Mitchell Dynamics, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory her career had taken. The woman who had once been dismissed as just an assistant had become one of the most respected voices in organizational development, influencing thousands of leaders and touching the lives of hundreds of thousands of employees. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of her success was the knowledge that she'd created something sustainable. Mitchell Dynamics had grown into an organization that could continue its mission of transformational leadership long after she stepped away from day-to-day operations. The methodologies she'd developed were being taught in business schools around the world, and the leaders she'd mentored were implementing similar approaches in their own organizations. The man who had once thought she'd be powerless without him had become one of her most trusted partners, proving that even the most damaged professional relationships could be transformed through commitment to growth and mutual respect. Their story had become a testament to the possibility of redemption and the power of principled leadership to create positive change in the world. Looking toward the future, Sarah knew that the work of transformation was never truly complete. Each new generation of leaders would face their own challenges and opportunities, and the principles of transformational leadership would need to evolve to address changing circumstances and emerging needs. But she also knew that the fundamental truth at the heart of her work would remain constant. When people are given the opportunity to contribute their best thinking and are supported in their efforts to excel, they will consistently exceed expectations and create value that benefits everyone involved. The assistant who had once been underestimated had become a leader who specialized in helping others discover and develop their own underestimated potential. And in doing so, she had proven that the most powerful force in any organization is the unlocked potential of its people. 20 years after founding Mitchell Dynamics, Sarah stood at the window of her corner office, watching the bustling city below as she prepared for what might be the most important meeting of her career. The call had come from Geneva. The World Economic Forum wanted her to lead a global initiative on organizational transformation in the post-pandemic era. The scope was unprecedented. Working with governments, multinational corporations, and international organizations to rebuild workplace cultures that had been fundamentally disrupted by years of remote work, economic uncertainty, and social upheaval. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who had once been deemed unfit for a junior marketing position was now being asked to help reshape the global economy's approach to human capital development. But what struck her even more was how the principles she'd discovered through her own struggles had proven universally applicable across cultures, industries, and organizational structures. Marcus entered her office carrying a comprehensive briefing folder prepared by their research team. At 52, he had evolved into one of the most sought-after transformation consultants in the world, but he still maintained the humility and attention to detail that had characterized his redemption journey. "The preliminary data from the WEF research team is fascinating," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "They've identified organizations in 43 countries that have successfully navigated post-pandemic transformation, and nearly 70% of them are using methodologies that trace back to our work." Sarah accepted the folder, noting its thickness. The World Economic Forum didn't make requests lightly, and their research had clearly been exhaustive. What's their primary concern? The same thing we've been seeing in our own consulting work, but on a global scale. Organizations everywhere are struggling with disengaged employees, declining productivity, and leadership teams that don't know how to manage hybrid workforces. The old command and control models have completely broken down, but most leaders don't know what to replace them with. Sarah nodded, having observed this phenomenon across multiple industries and continents. The pandemic had accelerated workplace evolution by decades, forcing changes that organizations weren't prepared to manage effectively. Leaders who had relied on physical presence and traditional hierarchies found themselves managing teams they rarely saw in person, and many had responded by either micromanaging remotely or completely disengaging from their leadership responsibilities. They want us to develop a comprehensive framework for organizational resilience, Marcus continued, something that can be adapted to different cultural contexts but maintains consistent principles about human potential and leadership effectiveness. The challenge was enormous, but Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with ambitious projects that could create meaningful change. How long do we have? 18 months to develop the framework, followed by a 3-year implementation phase with pilot organizations in every major economic region. Sarah spent the evening reviewing the WEF materials, struck by how the global disruption had created an unprecedented opportunity for fundamental transformation. Organizations that had been resistant to change for decades were suddenly open to radical new approaches, simply because their traditional methods were no longer viable. The next morning, she convened a meeting with her senior leadership team to discuss the implications of accepting such a massive undertaking. The conference room filled with the executives who had helped build Mitchell Dynamics into a global consultancy. Jennifer Walsh, now Chief Innovation Officer, David Rodriguez, who had become their Chief Operating Officer, Lisa Chen, their Chief Strategy Officer, and Elena Vasquez, who had joined Mitchell Dynamics 5 years earlier as Head of International Operations. This would be the largest consulting engagement in history, David observed, reviewing the financial projections. We'd need to expand our staff by at least 300% and establish operations on every continent. The impact potential is extraordinary, Lisa added. If we can develop frameworks that actually work across different cultural and economic contexts, we could influence millions of employees and thousands of organizations. Elena, who had experienced transformation from both sides as a Sterling Tech survivor and a Mitchell Dynamics leader, offered a different perspective. The question isn't whether we can handle the scale, it's whether we can maintain our principles and effectiveness while operating at this level. How do you ensure that transformational leadership remains authentic when it's being implemented across 43 countries simultaneously? It was exactly the right question, and one that went to the heart of Sarah's concerns about the project. Mitchell Dynamics had succeeded because they maintained close relationships with their clients and developed deep understanding of each organization's unique culture and challenges. Scaling that approach globally would require innovative methods for preserving the personal connection that made transformation possible. We'd need to create a network of certified partners, rather than trying to manage everything centrally, Sarah mused. Local consultants who understand their regional contexts, but are trained in our methodologies and committed to our principles. Marcus leaned forward, his strategic mind already working through the implications. A certification program for transformational leadership consultants. We could establish regional training centers and create ongoing support networks for partners around the world. But how do we ensure quality control? Jennifer asked. Our reputation is built on consistently excellent results. If certified partners deliver substandard work, it reflects on Mitchell Dynamics regardless of geographic distance. The discussion continued for hours, with the team working through logistical challenges, financial implications, and strategic considerations. By the end of the day, they had outlined a preliminary framework for accepting the WEF engagement while maintaining their commitment to excellence and authentic transformation. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a Geneva conference room with representatives from the World Economic Forum, the International Labor Organization, and the United Nations Global Compact. The meeting was being conducted in 4 languages simultaneously, and the participants included economists, sociologists, business leaders, and government officials from around the world. Ms. Mitchell, began Dr. Klaus Zimmermann, the WEF's Director of Future of Work Initiatives, your work has demonstrated that organizational transformation is not just possible but essential for sustainable economic growth. We believe that the principles you've developed could help address some of the most significant challenges facing the global workforce. Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she also understood the complexity of what they were proposing. Organizational transformation is inherently personal and cultural. What works in American corporations might not translate directly to family-owned businesses in Southeast Asia or government agencies in Northern Europe. Exactly why we need your expertise, replied Dr. Amara Okafor from the International Labor Organization. You've successfully adapted your methodologies to healthcare, education, government, and private industry. We need someone who understands both the universal principles of human motivation and the specific cultural factors that influence workplace behavior. The conversation that followed was unlike any business discussion Sarah had ever experienced. These weren't just consultants and clients talking about organizational efficiency. They were global leaders grappling with fundamental questions about human dignity, economic sustainability, and social stability in an interconnected world. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, representing the Asian Development Bank, raised concerns about cultural sensitivity. Many of our member countries have workplace hierarchies that are deeply rooted in historical and cultural traditions. How do you promote transformational leadership without inadvertently undermining cultural values? It was a sophisticated question that required Sarah to articulate something she'd learned through years of international consulting, but had never fully explained. Transformational leadership isn't about eliminating hierarchy or tradition, she replied carefully. It's about ensuring that power structures serve their intended purposes rather than existing for their own sake. Every culture has values related to respect, competence, and contribution. The key is aligning organizational practices with those deeper cultural values. The meeting concluded with an agreement to proceed with a 6-month planning phase, during which Sarah and her team would develop detailed frameworks and identify potential regional partners. The scale of the project required Mitchell Dynamics to establish a new division, specifically focused on global transformation initiatives. Marcus took on the role of Director of Global Operations, traveling extensively to meet with potential partners and assess regional needs. His reports painted a complex picture of a world where workplace challenges varied dramatically across cultures and economies, but underlying human needs remained remarkably consistent. I met with business leaders in Sao Paulo who are dealing with the same employee engagement issues we see in Chicago, he reported during one of their weekly planning calls. The specific manifestations are different. Brazilian corporate culture has its own characteristics, but the fundamental problems are identical. People want to feel valued, they want opportunities to contribute meaningfully, and they want leadership that actually understands their work. Sarah was simultaneously developing the theoretical framework that would underpin their global initiative. Drawing on 2 decades of transformation experience, she identified 7 core principles that seemed to transcend cultural and economic boundaries. Recognition of inherent human potential, regardless of position or background. Alignment between individual contributions and organizational objectives. Transparent communication about expectations, opportunities, and challenges. Leadership accountability for creating environments where excellence could flourish. Systematic development of capabilities at all organizational levels. Cultural adaptation that respected local values while promoting universal human dignity. Continuous evolution based on feedback and changing circumstances. These principles became the foundation for what would eventually be known as the Global Transformation Protocol, a comprehensive framework that could be adapted to any organizational context while maintaining consistent standards for leadership effectiveness and employee engagement. The regional partner selection process revealed the depth of talent and commitment that existed around the world. Sarah interviewed potential partners in 26 countries, finding experienced consultants who shared her commitment to authentic transformation and possessed deep understanding of their local business cultures. One particularly impressive candidate was Dr. Priya Sharma, a former McKinsey partner who had established her own consulting practice in Mumbai, specializing in organizational development for family-owned businesses. During their video interview, Dr. Sharma demonstrated exactly the kind of cultural sensitivity and principled leadership that Sarah was seeking. Indian business culture places tremendous emphasis on relationships and respect for experience, Dr. Sharma explained. But many traditional companies are struggling to engage younger employees who have different expectations about workplace autonomy and career development. The challenge is honoring cultural values while creating space for innovation and individual contribution. How would you approach that balance? Sarah asked. By helping leaders understand that respecting tradition and embracing change aren't mutually exclusive. Some of our most successful transformations have involved rediscovering traditional Indian business values, like the concept of seva or selfless service, and applying them in contemporary organizational contexts. This conversation exemplified the kind of sophisticated cultural adaptation that would be necessary for global success. Dr. Sharma understood both universal leadership principles and specific cultural dynamics, and she could help organizations evolve without losing their essential character. As Sarah concluded the interview, she realized that finding partners like Dr. Sharma represented more than just building a global consulting network. It meant discovering a worldwide community of leaders who shared her fundamental belief that every person deserved to work in an environment where their potential could flourish. The assistant who had once been dismissed for lacking vision was now connecting visionaries across continents, proving that true leadership wasn't about commanding others. It was about empowering them to become the best versions of themselves. In that moment, Sarah understood that her story had come full circle. She had transformed from someone seeking recognition to someone dedicated to helping others recognize their own worth. And that, she realized, was the most meaningful success of all. The end.